Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hidden Hockey Podcast. Again, my name's Matt Gordon. If you're new to the channel and you're just finding out about my draft coverage, please do yourself a favor. Please subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate those that come on to the channel and, either leave a comment, ask your questions, do whatever you have to do. But, we're trying to build this community out. The draft is obviously a big part of what my channel is. So, do yourself a favor if you're very involved in NHL prospects, you like the NHL draft, do yourself a favor, please subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. Spread it amongst your friends, spread it amongst those that are your prospect followers, and put it on your feeds, because we'd love to grow this community a little bit more, and really appreciate those that do that. So without further ado, I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to cut right to the rest of this here. So we're going to go ahead and talk about my top 16 I have for the 2025 draft. So let me go ahead and share my screen here real quick. So I got my PR here. Let's see how you guys are seeing everything. All right, so number 16. Number 16 for me is Victor Klingsell. Victor Klingsell obviously is somebody who's played for Skellefteå over the under-20 league. I'm obviously very bullish on him to have him here at 16. I just really like his overall game. I think he's a little bit perimeter, so that's why he's not, super, super high end on my board, but I'm definitely ranking him higher than most. Definitely a guy who's a playmaker. I find that he's a really shifty skater as well. Got great edge work. Defensively, there's a little bit of work to his game, but the overall skill set, what he's been able to show throughout the year, regardless whether it was the Ivan Helenka, other international tournaments, he's really performed well for Sweden this past year. Very excited to see what he's able to do and what kind of player he's going to end up developing into. So with this being said, to clarify as well, this is just a personal rank for me. It's not how I think the mock draft is going to go. It's just where I have these players ranked. So going now to number 15, another divisive player, somebody who a lot of people are extremely curious about. Ivan Ryabkin, he played for MHK Dynamo Moscow to start the year of the MHL, and then eventually moved to the Muskegon Lumberjacks later in the year. So he came over to North America. Obviously, before he hit North America, really did not do a lot of great things. A lot of concerns about his his diet, his character, the work ethic. He, claims to have not had a great work ethic while he was in Russia. So it was very interesting to see, what kind of player was going to come out of this year. And I think the back half of the year in having Muskegon come in and have a really good opportunity to play was an awesome opportunity for him. I think it was something that we were all really looking forward to seeing as prospect followers and for people that just want success from young individuals. Ivan, to me, is somebody who I think is going to be a really impressive player going forward as long as he can keep his head straight. A lot of people would compare him, to guys like Nikolai Zherdev or some of the other Russian players that have struggled to really acclimate to North America. But I really like his overall game. I think there is a lot more upside than there is downside as long as he's able to work through his things. But I'm ranking him purely on his upside here. I think to me, he's definitely a first rounder in most years. I would argue that in a normal year or in a weaker year, he ranks up into this top 15 of the class here because I believe there is a lot of prospects that are overvalued in this draft. And I've put videos out in the past, but my personal belief is that this 2025 draft is one of the weakest drafts I've ever covered. And I've watched and looked at drafts since 2008. So it's obviously an interesting dilemma, an interesting thing that we have going on here with divisiveness and rankings. But personally, in watching Ivan, I've caught two really solid viewings of him in North America, and I actually even one in Russia. And, every time I come away with him being a really good power winger, somebody who, given the right amount of time and space, can be very lethal on the puck and is an offensively gifted and creative guy. Obviously, the big red flags are there, but, if he's able to turn this around, I think the highest end upside he has is slotted right here. Going out of number 14, we got Cameron Reed from the Kitchener Rangers. I have him ranked here at 14. a little higher for Cameron as well. Cameron's widely viewed to be a late first round pick. I personally see him as a very, very skilled player, and I think somebody with a lot more offensive upside than what he's shown in the OHL so far. Obviously the four-way skating is unbelievable. I think his ability is super impressive. I really like how smart he is with pucks. I think he's got a great decision process and the way he looks at, situations. I think he's an excellent hockey player. There's some growth and some different things you got to look through with Cameron Reed, but I really like his game in terms of what he can mold into, what he can develop into. And he's definitely somebody to me who I think has got middle pairing upside with the potential to play on your PK. Definitely somebody who's incredibly versatile, and that's incredibly valued in the game of hockey. So really like Cameron Reed here. I think he's somebody who I'm more bullish on than most. I got Carter Bear here at 13. Newer person in my rankings. I like Carter Bear a lot, but I think I had to watch a lot more video on him to really truly appreciate his game. Reminds me a lot of Marco Kasper in terms of a guy who's completely, just absolutely relentless, a little more physical than a Marco Kasper would be, but came through the year, had a really good year until his injury. And, you're hoping with his Achilles that it's something that can heal correctly and heal in a way that is really successful. We've seen it with guys like Erik Karlsson and a few other players that have come back from Achilles tears. So with Carter Bear, you get a guy who's an offense, he's literally, he's a bear in the offensive zone, very tenacious on pucks, great forechecking ability, really versatile in terms of his game as an offensive playmaker. There's just a lot to like with Carter. I think there's a ton of potential with him, a ton of really good growth opportunities with him as a player as well. I think with the right development staff, they're going to love this kid, and he'll fit into a middle six role somewhere, regardless of whether it's a contender or a playoff team. He's got the playoff attributes that a lot of teams look for. And I would expect him to probably even go higher than 13, but personally I have him ranked at 13 in my personal ranking. So going now to number 12, we go to the guy who probably fell the most for me this year in Anton Frundell. I have him at 12. I really like Anton. I like his game. I like what he brings to the table. But, obviously the injury concerns are very valid. There's a ton of things you got to look at with him. I think there's, in looking at a guy like Anton, you look at the pro upside. I thought he played really well at the Ivan Holenka last year. He obviously went through his injuries. He did struggle to acclimate to the pro level until the back half of the year once he finally found his game again. Going to the Allsvenskan, I think was a very important step for him. I think the SHL would have been a bit much this year. Now he goes into the not the USHL. He goes into the SHL now with Djurgården getting promoted. Perfect with his development arc. I think he's really got an opportunity to be a very impact player at the Swedish Hockey League next year. And, with Anton, you got a really good skater, very smart, 200-foot guy. I think his shot is very underrated in terms of where he's at comparatively to some other prospects. With a guy like Anton Frundell, you look at his game, I think, he's somebody he's definitely defensively responsible. I think he's a guy who has a little bit more creativity than what's been shown this past year. You can see the reads he makes. You can see the vision he has. There's just a ton to like with Anton, and he's very pro ready. I think that's why he's shooting up scouts' radars. And, some people have had him as high as 2 or 3. I had him actually at 1.2. But for me, the lows were very low. I think there's more worries with a guy like Anton Frundell. He's not somebody who's going to be a ready-made player. And for that, I can't rank him as highly as some of these other guys. So with Anton, though, like I said, you get a really good offensively creative player, somebody with an incredible 200-foot game. The boots are a little bit slow, but he can get there. Definitely somebody who he finds himself in the right positioning, a very smart player. But it's just a matter of, can he bring this all together into a really cohesive package? And, through his injuries this year and having the key development points he's missed this year, I had to rank him a little bit lower. Going now to number 11, we got Kashan Aitchison here for the Barrie Colts. This guy was my biggest riser this year. Kashan's a throwback defenseman, somebody who, had showed a lot of offense as well, scored a lot of goals at the OHL level this year. Definitely a physical player, somebody who really brings in a nice element of physicality to his game. Teams, salivate at watching this kid play the game. And I think he's somebody with a really unique and defined skill set. And, teams are going to want him really high. I think he could have his stock go up into the top 10. We don't know yet for sure, but his game is hard to find nowadays. He's definitely a jewel, kind of a diamond in the rough style player. I think his development arc from the last 12 months or so has, increased tenfold. The skating is pretty good with Kashan as well. He's not, somebody who's going to burn you, but he's definitely NHL average, no question. You definitely like to see where he's able to go in his game and what he's able to do. And, with a guy like, with Kashan, it's somebody who, he clearly will have an impact at the OHL level next year. He's definitely somebody you want to look at going forward for the rest of this, the rest of next year and the years following. And, to me, I think there's some middle pairing upside there. And given his good shot as well, I think he's got some potential to play on your power play too. Number 10 here, you go to Malcolm Spence. Malcolm just committed to University of Michigan, but this year played at the OHL level. He's obviously another player that's incredibly defensively responsible, very mature game, good shot. He has a lot of just really great qualities to him. He doesn't have an elite quality to him, though, which is why he won't rank as highly as some other prospects. I think he's been kind of overlooked in a lot of scouting. To me, he's somebody who definitely fits in the middle of the first round. A lot of people are even putting him in towards the second and even, the middle of the second round from some of the, less optimistic rankings out there. But, I have him as high as I do because I don't see how you can rank some of these players that are ranked ahead of him the way they are. To me, he's a fringe top 10 guy, which is why I have him at 10. With Malcolm, you get a great kid with a great head on his shoulders, clearly somebody who's well thought out. Has played now in the OHL for a few years, has been very defensively responsible. Has a good shot as well. Tends to be more of a playmaker, but he's also very good in the corners, very good at, grinding in certain situations and finding his game. And he's not somebody who's making a ton of mistakes in his game. Very polished in his game, very responsible defensively. I think he's got great mobility as well. He's a very good skater. Not the most amazing accelerator. I think he's a good accelerator. And I think within this class, he's right around the average of the class in terms of acceleration. But you look at the versatility, you look at what you can do with him. He's a coach's player. You can trust him. That's going to speak really highly to these teams. And I think he's probably somebody who interviewed incredibly well at the combine. So looking at a guy like Malcolm Spence, he's going to go to college now, be in a very good development system at the University of Michigan. I think Malcolm Spence has got a lot more upside that's still here to give. And, you're looking at these projections now when they're 21, 22. Malcolm Spence might be one of those guys that outranks and jumps up 4 or 5 spots in a redraft and probably falls closer to like the 6th or 8th spot, in a few years, just due to, I think, where his development arc will go. Number 9, one of the more wild cards of the draft, Roger McQueen. Roger McQueen has obviously dealt with a lot of injury issues. To be 17 and have dealt with the injury issues he's dealt with is something that, obviously worries a lot of scouts. Definitely a guy who still has a lot more physical development. Despite the fact he's 6'5", he's probably pushing like 190, 200 pounds. I think this is a little bit outdated. He's probably closer to 200, but, Roger's a guy who I have a ton of time for. You can build around him. I think he's got a really good, I think his skating is super impressive for a guy who's 6'5". Stands up really straight in his stride, very much a headstrong kind of player, gets in front of the net, does what he needs to do. Got an awesome first pass as well. I think he's somebody who, can start on a power play and really build a play out as opposed to needing to have somebody to facilitate with him. With Roger, you obviously the lack of games this year concerns you, but him coming back in the Western Hockey League and doing what he did in terms of, point per game average as he was coming back, staying pretty similar to what he played the year before. I think there's just a lot to like there with Roger. You hope everything heals with him correctly. It sounds like he was able to participate at the combine quite a bit, and do a lot of the drills, and there shouldn't be too many concerns physically anymore. I think given a really solid year this year, if he would have put up 110, 120 points, I think a lot of people would have put him top 5. Because of the uncertainty, though, I have him ranked at 9. But there's definitely a potential for him to fall at, going to 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that range for the draft. I think that's his high end. Number 8, we're going to go with Porter Martone for the Brampton Steelheads. He and Miso were the two really dominant draft eligibles this year. He comes in, he's at I think he had over 100 points this year. Great frame, great ability, similar to McQueen in terms of a bigger framed guy, great size. He's listed at 6'3" here. I think he's closer to 6'4", maybe even 6'5". Just a really good skill set, somebody with great hands for a guy that size. A great skater as well, definitely an above average skater. Defensively, there's some work to be done, but nothing too involved or too crazy. He's just, sometimes misses routes, misses reads. Isn't necessarily super consistent, but honest, when he's truly playing at an elite level, there's very few that can stop him. He's just like a freight train. He finds his way, and he's very strong on the puck and strong-willed. And, it's hard to take pucks away from guys like that, especially when they're physically developed the way they are. He played at the World Juniors this year, played a little bit of a bottom 6 role. I thought was decently effective. Wasn't blowing away the waters or anything like that, but he was definitely somebody who I thought made an impact as a draft eligible, which doesn't always happen at the World Juniors. So, obviously there's a lot to like there with a guy like Porter Martone. And I think a lot of teams and a lot of them definitely interviewed him. And I think, there could be some real consideration within the top 5 as well. Jackson Smith, just recently committed to Penn State, played for Victoria this year, and was one of their key defensemen. I thought he was a really super solid player. I've had viewings now for 3 years on Jackson. With Jackson Smith, you get a guy who's a great skater, good physical game. Again, ranked, at the combine, he measured at 6'4" and 209, I want to say was his weight. Seems to be rising on a lot of boards. I think he's somebody who the public perception is growing on him a lot. I think with his ability at 6'4", I think his skating is maybe like 1 or 2 steps below Schaefer, but it's still very elite. Obviously Schaefer probably, and I'll talk about him when his ranking comes up here at 3. But I like the ability to, navigate a power play. I like how he was able to adjust to the Western Hockey League and be able to manage that really well within just a couple years. He's a guy who I think could be a key factor in the under 20s next year and playing for the World Juniors. I thought he did a great job at the U18s this year, was definitely a leader, took on, 25 to 27 minutes a game. Somebody who clearly shouldered a lot of responsibility and was able to do really effective things within his age group. Going to Penn State, I think it's a really good development opportunity. I think he outgrew the Western Hockey League. So for him, to go to a Big Ten school and go to Penn State and play against the Michigans, the Michigan States, the Ohio States, Minnesota, the various other schools that are out there, I think it's a really good development opportunity for Jackson. And I think the sky's the limit with him. He's definitely somebody, to me, could definitely have some top pairing upside in the future. Number 6, one of the short kings out here, we got Victor Eklund. Victor Eklund, obviously this year, didn't really show anything that didn't make him look very good this year. I thought he was super consistent through the year. Workman, just an absolute workman mentality, somebody with a great amount of skill, good potential. I have a lot of time for him in terms of what he's able to do on the rink. He's somebody who's not afraid to get around any board battles. Very skilled with the puck as well. Great, really good shot, actually, a very pro level shot already. Also an excellent playmaker as well. There isn't too much that he can't develop into a pro, at least average skill set. He's listed there at 5'11" and $170. If he can get to about 190 and be strong with the puck, I think he's somebody who will be a very good player in the National Hockey League. Definitely, you can fit him at all points in your lineup. He can go from the first line to the fourth line, play with any capable abilities. Obviously proved that at the pro level too, and did really well in the Allsvenskan. Even better, he had actually even a better adjustment than Anton Frundell did, which I think a lot of people had the perception that the reverse would happen. With Victor Eklund, you have a guy who maybe The only thing I would say that stops him from being a top 5 player is that his offensive game is really good. I don't know if it's 30, 40 goal good though. And in order to really be considered to be in that top class of prospects, you have to have that, that type of production at the pro level, at least, or have some projectability towards that. With Victor, I think he's a very skilled player. I think he's somebody who a lot of teams really like. I think there's a potential for him to get 30 goals in the future. I just don't know if it's going to be much more than that. And, but we'll see. Like I said, Victor Eklund is somebody who I think any team would be very happy to have, regardless of where they're at in their development and regardless of where they're at in their prospect pool too. I think he fits into every single scheme that is imaginable, which makes him a very highly valued player. And I have a ton of time to talk about a guy like Victor Eklund. Number 5 is somebody who I am incredibly bullish on. I would argue I'm probably his biggest stan. That would be Cole Reshny. Cole Reshny obviously has been ranked anywhere from 13 to 35. With Cole, I don't understand where the height thing comes into play. He's 5'10". I know he's a little bit shorter, but he's a $187 here, as you can see here. The hockey sense is through the roof on this kid. I look at him, and the only thing I can draw to him is Braden Point. Watching junior age Braden Point and watching Cole Reshny is like a clone. I think there's a ton of skill. I think there's a really good opportunity for this kid to develop and grow his skating. Already has the offensive creativity. Already has a great shot. Really is able to manage the game very well. He had an unbelievable Western Hockey League playoffs, 25 points in 14 games. Points wise, comparatively to Braden Point, they're within a point of each other, and Cole played 10 less games in his draft year. The uncertainty was there with Braden Point. He went in the second round. I think the uncertainty is just the same for Cole, but I'm betting on the upside here. I think he's a guy who, given the right opportunity and the right timing, he's played on all sorts of different teams that are really good, teams that are average, teams that are, not so great. And he's been over a point per game at every single level he's ever played at. And, I think that attribute and that ability is a bit underrated in terms of where I think people see his game. I think there's a lot more to give with him. I think he's somebody who I have a ton of time for. So with Cole, I think there's just the sky's the limit. I think, at his best, there's some 40 goal upside with him, and he's got to be able to show that, through his development and through his hard work. And I think he can do that very easily. Number 4 here, a guy who also rose up a ton of boards this year is Caleb Denoyer, for the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Played this year with 2 wrist injuries and still put up almost 100 points this year. It's pretty incredible what he was able to do. Somebody who gets rave, there's the Athletic article on him where he got rave reviews from his coach. You watch this game, he's an incredibly smart 200-foot player. A lot of, I've seen some comparisons a little bit to Bergeron. I think that's a little unfair, but, in that vein and in that responsibility and mindset, I think there's a real Bergeron mindset there. I don't know if the Bergeron ability is there, but I think the mindset's there. I think there's a really good opportunity for him to really get even better. Playing in the Quebec League, he's not playing against the most unbelievable quality of competition. It's a very good league. I'm not trying to note what they're able to do, but the Ontario League and the Western League this year have a really good class. Always usually have really good classes, and with the QMJHL, they're always kind of that distant third, that kind of the redheaded stepsister, if you will, of Major Junior. But to be able to do what he did at as a 17-year-old at that level, and just be as dominant as he was, you can't shake your stick at that, right? You can't shake your head and say, hey, that's not possible. He's not going to be very good. I think there's a ton to like with Caleb. I think he's super defensively responsible. He's very pro in his mindset and his approach to the game, and I think that's going to appeal to a lot of teams. Fits in kind of similar to Victor Eklund, fits in all roles. Can play with your high-end players, can play with your lower-end guys. Either way, he's very defensively responsible, very offensively gifted. Just have a lot of time for Caleb Denoyer. I think there's not a weakness in his game, and I don't think there's a real uncertainty towards his impact at the National Hockey League level. I think there's no doubt he'll be effective at the National Hockey League level. I'll just say that. And that's why you have him ranked here in the top 5. Number 3, we got Matthew Schaefer. Obviously, widely considered to be the number 1 overall pick by a majority of different scouts. I've talked about this in a few different videos, and it is my belief that he is not a number 1 overall pick. He's just not. I watch his game. I think he's a very good player. I think he's a very skilled player. I think his skating is obviously one of the best in the class. But I look at his offensive creativity. I don't know that it's the level of Makar or Dahlin or Orlando DuPont, even a Keaton Verhoff. I just don't know that I see that kind of player out of him. And for me, it's hard to rank a defenseman at 1 unless they're that kind of quality. I do like his game a lot. I think there's a ton to give with him. I think there's, obviously he's a guy who can run your power play. He's a guy who can PK very well. He's very good with his gaps because his skating covers all ground. That being said, though, I think he's very limited offensively. And I think the other thing, too, is he dealt with some injuries. He dealt with his mother passing this year. Has had a lot of different development obstacles for him, and he's been very successful with that. And that's a credit to him and a credit to his character. But that being said, I just see in the clips I've seen of him and in the games I've watched of his, I see a good player. I even see a great player at times, but I don't see this elite number 1 defenseman. I think there's a really strong 2-3 defenseman here. I just don't see the number 1 over, this number 1 overall talent that everybody else is seeing. That's just my thoughts on Matt Schaefer, but a ton of time for the player. I think he's the best defenseman in this draft, no question. Just don't see him as the number 1 overall. Number 2 for me, and probably actually the player I think is the best player, in my opinion, is Michael Misa. Michael Misa has been, an exceptional status player, played in Saginaw the last 3 years now. With Misa, you get a really good skilled hockey player, somebody who, has come into the OHL level and adjusted pretty easily. And then this year went and moved to center and got 130 plus points in 60 games, averaging almost 2 points per game, which puts them up there with the Mitch Marners, the Austin Matthews, the various other players that have gone on and played, at the junior level and gotten to those point statistics. The truly elite do that in the CHL. And obviously with a guy like Michael Misa, he's been able to prove that time and again. The skating is I would say NHL above average. I think his creativity and his offensive playmaking is one of the best in the draft. Clearly, as a guy who can score, he's always been able to score through his career. He's always put up a ton of points. With Misa, I think there's just so much to give in his game. I think there's so much that he has that hasn't been unlocked yet. Obviously had some awesome opportunities to develop with the Saginaw Spirit. I'm surprised he didn't make the World Junior roster this year. I thought he was capable of being on that roster and being a very effective player, but I would expect him to have a big role next year at the World Juniors, being a top 6 guy. Out of the guys in this draft, I think because of the readiness of him, I think him and Denoyer are 2 of the guys who have the most opportunity to make the National Hockey League right out of the draft. Do I think both of them or either one will? No. I think they're all destined to probably either go NCAA or they're destined to stay in the leagues they're in right now. That being said, Michael's a very skilled player, somebody who I have a ton of time for, really like his overall game, and just, there's not much else that hasn't already been said about Michael Misa. I think he's somebody who probably is my number 1. But with James Higgins being here, I'm going to talk about him. They both have the similar skill sets, and it was hard to rank them. They were basically my 1-2 most of the year. So don't want to change from that. And I've gotten some really good viewings on James Higgins, which leads me to James Higgins. So James Higgins was my number 1 overall personal ranked player. The viewings I got of him this year were excellent. I think a lot of people with the college players, they're very spoiled in terms of, you look at a guy like, Macklin Celebrini, Adam Fantilli, Owen Power. Some of these guys had really impactful, I would say Power less so, but these guys had really amazing freshman seasons. And you look at a guy like James Higgins didn't just have the puck for him. He was dealing with Ryan Leonard. He was dealing with Gabe Perreault. A lot of puck touches offensively that had to be spread across the board. So for a guy like James Higgins, he took what he could. He got a point per game, which is still very impressive as a freshman. He's a guy who at the World Juniors I thought was excellent. I think it was very underrated in terms of his performance. Brought a lot to the table. I thought he was a very skilled player in his own right, and there's a ton of time for me with him. I'm just very curious to see what he's able to do going into the rest of his career. I look at him and I see a very like a lighter version of Patrick Kane when he's at his best. I think there's, a really great offensive creativity with his game. I think he's an excellent stick handler. The skating is very shifty. There's some work physically to do, but Kane also had the same thing and went number 1 overall. So, I think with Higgins, you got a guy who I'm kind of sick of seeing the slander about him. I think he's a very, very good hockey player. Somebody who is a victim of over scouting, just like Misa has been, just like Malcolm Spence has been, and a few others. I think there's a ton of really great attributes about all these players. But James Higgins has this elite playmaking ability that nobody else has in this draft. I think he's a guy who could put up 60, 70 points in the National Hockey League. He's, just a ton of time for him and what his game brings. You can put him with top playmakers, and he's very smart and adept at recognizing the strong points of each of these players. And, you watch his skating, he just looks like a magician out there, man. He's just so smooth with his skating, very elusive with his brain, makes some really offensively creative moves. Just finds his way to make, production happen. He's just a constant production machine. He just never stops going, and got an immense amount of time for a guy like James Higgins. So, that was it for my top 16 now. Some other guys I have ranked. I got Cameron Schmitz ranked as well. I got, I got LJ Mooney, Adam Benach. All those short guys, I have them closer into the back half of the first, late half, second half of the, basically anywhere from the second half of the first to the second half of the second round is where I have a lot of those guys ranked. We'll go ahead now and we can talk about Q&A, talk about some various rankings that are out there as well. If you guys have any questions, please put them in the side and we can talk through them. Some other interesting players I've seen that, are out there. I really have some sleepers as well. I've done a video on that. So if you haven't seen that video, please do yourself a favor. Jump on. It's on the channel here. So if you go on YouTube, it's all listed out there. Very interesting group of sleepers that are out there this year. I think there's a lot of guys, especially in Finland and Norway, that are very undervalued as prospects. And it's really really interesting to see the variances in the ranks this year. I think this year has had more variance across public and private scouts than probably ever before, just due to perceptions of the talent within the players. And, I think COVID also had a little bit of an impact on some of these guys just because of, when their development happened, it was 13, 14. And that's when a lot of these guys get seriously involved in the game of hockey. And I think that it did have a pretty decent impact, I think, on the depth of this class. With that being said, yeah, like I said, put your questions off in the chat on the side. Even if you're watching on recording, if I don't get to it today, please do yourself a favor. Please still comment. I really appreciate you guys, talking and engaging with the material and the media. So, with that being said, we got a few other things we can talk about here. I think in terms of where I think the draft will go, my personal belief for this draft is that there will be a lot of trades to get, a lot of trades to trade up. Trading down will always be a thing, but I just don't know the value is really there this year. You don't have, I think there's only really 14, 15 guys that I think are bona fide first round talents across the board, across draft years. I'm of the opinion that, this draft is probably about 50 deep in terms of guys who I think could make the NHL. I think there's just a real lack of quality players this year. I don't know. It's just, there's a lot of overage players that I think could be selected. I think there's a real opportunity for the 05s even to get drafted as well. I really like Ben Reutinen, who has gone and played at Toronto's development camp. You look at guys like Aiden Park is a guy who I think is an overager that'll get picked in the mid rounds. There's just various other players I think that are out there that are going to be really good hockey players in the future that weren't necessarily picked in their draft years. So it should be really interesting to see what will happen and how these things will break down. I'm going to do I'll do a live stream on Friday for the first round of the draft. I won't be able to do my day 2 live stream, unfortunately, just because of, some prior engagements. But if you could do yourself a favor, please, tune in on Friday. Really appreciate you guys that would be able to come on here. If you guys have any other questions or want to know more about prospects, please do yourself a favor. Please subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be putting out more content this week. Would really appreciate you guys engaging and staying focused on, making sure the content's out there. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump off here. Really appreciate you guys. If you're watching, I'm recording again. I really appreciate you guys being on here. And with that, I'm going to head out. See you guys.